There is a way forward based on a number of core elements: decisive national actions, an operational accord that internationalizes those actions, assistance for nations that are the most vulnerable and least prepared to meet the effects of climate change, and standards of transparency that provide credibility to the entire process. The world community should accept no less, and the United States is ready to embrace this path. First, we have announced our intention to cut our emissions in the range of 17% below 2005 levels in 2020, and ultimately in line with final climate and energy legislation. In light of the President's goals, the expected pathway in pending legislation would extend those cuts to 30% by 2025, 42% by 2030, and more than 80% by 2050. Second, we also recognize that an agreement must provide generous financial and technological support for developing countries, particularly the poorest and most vulnerable, to help them reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. That's why we joined an effort to mobilize Fast Start funding that will ramp up to $10 billion in 2012 to support the adaptation and mitigation efforts of countries in need. And today, I'd like to announce that in the context of a strong accord in which all major economies stand behind meaningful mitigation actions and provide full transparency as to their implementation, the United States is prepared to work with other countries toward a goal of jointly mobilizing $100 billion a year by 2020 to address the climate change needs of developing countries. We expect this funding will come from a wide variety of sources, public and private, bilateral and multilateral, including alternative sources of finance. This will include a significant focus on forestry and adaptation, particularly, again, I repeat, for the poorest and most vulnerable among us. So there should be no doubt about the commitment of the United States to reaching a successful agreement here in Copenhagen and meeting this great global challenge together. But ultimately, this must be a common effort. We all know there are real challenges that remain in the hours left to these negotiations. And it is no secret that we have lost precious time in these past days. In the time we have left here, it can no longer be about us versus them. This group of nations pitted against that group. We all face the same challenge together. I have often quoted a Chinese proverb which says that when you are in a common boat, you have to cross the river peacefully together. Well, we are in a common boat. All of the major economies have an obligation to commit to meaningful mitigation actions and stand behind them in a transparent way. And all of us have an obligation to engage constructively and creatively toward a workable solution. We need to avoid negotiating approaches that undermine rather than advance progress toward our objective. I am deeply concerned about the consequences for developing countries, from Bangladesh to the Maldives, from the Caribbean to West Africa and the Pacific Islands. If we cannot secure the kind of strong operational accord I've described today, we know what the consequences will be for the farmer in Bangladesh, or the herder in Africa, or the family being battered by hurricanes in Central America. Without that accord, there won't be the kind of joint global action from all of the major economies we all want to see, and the effects in the developing world could be catastrophic. We know what will happen: rising seas, lost farmland, drought, and so much else. Without the accord, the opportunity to mobilize significant resources to assist developing countries with mitigation and adaptation will be lost. Over the next 2 days, we will be discussing these issues further. This problem is not going away even when we leave Copenhagen, but neither is our resolve. We must try to overcome the obstacles that remain. We must not only seize this moment, but raise our oars together and row in the same direction toward our common destination and destiny. And the United States is ready to do our part. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. John Broder from New York Times.
Where is John Broder from New York Times? Oh, John, I see you. I can't hear you, John. You have to raise your voice.
Can you hear me now?
Good.
The commitment toward $100 billion by 2020 is in line with, although at the lower end of what
You're going to have to hold it up. Still
okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. The commitment toward a $100 billion fund by 2020 is in line with, although at the lower end of what Great Britain and the EU have proposed. You mentioned that it would include some alternative forms of finance. Could you spell that out a little bit? And do you seriously believe that $100 billion is going to be enough and going to be enough to move this process to a conclusion tomorrow night?
Well, $100 billion a year is a lot of money. That's a commitment that is very real and can have tangible effects. There is a pipeline that both has to be filled and then the funds dispersed. So we actually think $100 billion is appropriate, usable, and will be effective. There are a number of different ideas about how we can pursue the financing to achieve the annual $100 billion commitment. I don't want to go into that here because there are many different ideas. The important point for the next 2 days is not to talk about how we would fund money that we haven't yet agreed to fund, but to make the agreement that that is what we're going to do. Because I want to underscore what I said. In the absence of an operational agreement that meets the requirements that I outlined, there will not be that kind of financial commitment, at least from the United States.
Thank you. Marco to Denmark. 2 questions. Number 1, as you may have heard, there's been sort of a stalemate in the negotiations. Who will now drive the negotiations forward? And number 2, there's been rumors that President Obama may not come tomorrow. Will he come, actually?
Well, as to the first question, we all have to drive the negotiations forward. I'm here today not only to make this announcement, which is a significant commitment from President Obama and the United States, but to underscore the importance of engaging in a very constructive and active way over the next hours. We're running out of time. It's unfortunate that there has been problems with the process, difficulties with certain parties being willing to come to the table, all kinds of discussions and disagreements, sometimes about the past rather than about the future. But the underlying reality is we have to do everything we can to reach this agreement. Because in the absence of a new agreement that binds everyone to their relative commitments and responsibilities, where the developed countries take on these obligations and where the developing countries work on their own mitigation and adaptation measures with a transparency mechanism, there will not be the kind of concerted global action that we so desperately need. The President is planning to come tomorrow. Obviously, we hope that there will be something to come forward.